Well, hello there, and welcome to day 32 of A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. And today I thought I would do something quite fun to refresh the month with and continue with the Happy Death Day sequel, Happy Death Day to You. So this is the 2019 Christopher Landon directed sequel to the 2017 film that I watched last week. I can't lie, I was quite keen to follow it up. Saying that, sequels are a funny thing, especially what you might call unintentional genre sequels are a funny thing, because for me, I have a funny relationship with them. I grew up in that time when we were just starting to see the sequels to classic films pop up that almost... They were films like Ghostbusters 2 and Back to the Future Part 2 that obviously were trying to capture the magic of the original, but of course were really trying to replicate the success of what the first film did, or subvert it in an odd way, as is the case with Back to the Future 2. And unfortunately, because of sort of the age that I was, I ended up seeing those films before I saw the original, in both those cases. I think there's at least half a dozen films that I could name where I saw the sequel to a classic before I saw the original, and it somewhat coloured my view. Like, for instance, I love Ghostbusters 2, but unfortunately it means my perception of Ghostbusters 1 is strange, because Ghostbusters 2 is essentially almost a remake of Ghostbusters 1. Conversely, Back to the Future 2, I did not enjoy at all. It's a confusing hodgepodge of stuff, and I'm very strict about sort of that kind of time travel sci-fi. I get very unhappy when it's done poorly, and it's such an odd film that it really affects my viewing of Back to the Future 1. And so I've always since then had this hostile attitude to what you might call the unexpected sequel, especially even ones that people love and cherish, like Die Hard 2 or Scream 2 are examples of films that I just don't get. I don't enjoy them that much. A lot of people would say, you know, Scream 3 is their least favourite of the series, when in fact Scream 2 is mine. And so I came into this with the kind of concern that it would do one of two things. Either, A, simply retread the same structure as the original, possibly expand the world and the characters a little, but structurally, essentially do the same kinds of jokes, the same slasher structure as the first film. Or secondly, and I was trying to quickly come up with examples of this, but I could only think of them in animated films. But there is a habit in films that didn't plan to have a sequel, where because they couldn't get the right cast members back, or just for whatever reason, because they, I don't know, they didn't want to compromise the narrative of the original, multitude of reasons, they will take a secondary or minor character and make them the focus for a sequel or a spin-off. The only example that sort of immediately came to my mind as I was thinking about that was the sequel to the animated film Anastasia, where they focused on the flunky sidekick Bat character, villain Bat character, which was such an odd choice, but that's by the by. But both of those things can be common directions for horror sequels to go. And when you watch this film, it starts to do both. In terms of, you're watching the film and immediately it's focusing on the minorest of minor characters who was there for one joke in the first film, who then you think watching it thinking, oh my god, is this character going to become the main character? Even though Jessica Roth, who in my last video I said was wonderful in the first film, plays a supporting role in it, I'm thinking in the first 20 minutes, maybe slightly less of the film, you're watching it thinking, oh my god, they're making this guy the main focus. But they do so much better than that. Because in the same manner as I said with the first Happy Death Day, this is a very self-reflexive narrative. It knows that it's within... We're in the age of the self-examinating genre, and it can go one of two ways. It is starting to get quite tiring, you know, but it also shows that the films that are being made by people who both know and love, you know, the genres and the narratives that they're telling stories about, to the point where they know when they're walking upon well-trodden ground. And so what this film does is then subvert your expectations of that narrative, at which point you start to think, as the film goes on, oh, it simply is going to do the same conceit as the first one, which is someone trapped in a time loop, they die every day, they're killed by a slasher villain, and then they have to live that same day over, Groundhog style, until they can solve the murder or break the loop in whatever way. And that does exist in the narrative, but it starts to try to expand upon it in a way that actually is quite interesting. I won't say I wasn't still hostile towards it, because whereas in the original, and a lot of these kinds of films, the reason for the science fiction, horror, fantasy premise is almost, you know, if you watch the original Groundhog Day, there are so many fan theories and musings and, you know, internal and external explanations for why the events are happening to Bill Murray's character, but it's never stated, and you're just simply left to draw your own conclusions for why he gets trapped in the time loop. Happy Death Day does the same thing. You never really, the first one, you never fully understand why this is happening to a Tree, that's Jessica Roth's character. But it just is. It just is. Then, Happy Death Day to You, of course, then wants to start to explore that. Unfortunately, I've come to a point when it comes to horror where I feel like less is more. And although the horror element of this film is not the time loop, you know, the slasher structure is what it is, the fact that it starts to explain and break it down does begin to affect my enjoyment of it, because I then think about the logistics of time travel, and it goes from something that could be science fiction, could be fantasy, to hard science fiction, and it really digs its heels in that respect. But saying that, it still does explore interesting ideas, and the fact that it sort of put its flag in the ground means it goes, okay, this is what this genre is, this is what kind of narrative we're going to be in. Now let's actually explore the fundamentals of what this, and I'm going to say, science fiction premise is, and why the world works the way it does. What the film then goes into is, of course, like I said, it then starts to re-examine or retread the structure of the original film. And so the problem then is, you go, okay, so of course there's a killer. Is it the same killer from the first one? Is it a different killer? What's the context? Now, having a greater understanding of the science fiction of the world, what does it mean? And the next problem you have with that the original I felt really sidestepped, was there was a sincerity in the character, and as I mentioned for that first film, you really get a sense of arc and emotional investment in Tree and her journey and who she starts as in the film and where she ends up, and expanding her relationships, her grief, and why she became the person she became because of loss. And the question then becomes, well, in the sequel, what does that mean? You know, are we going to lose that sincerity? Are we going to lose that genuine emotional arc because we're retreading the same narrative ground? But to its credit, it does try to open that in a new and different direction. I don't think it does it as well as the first one, simply because I think that the freshness and like I said, the sincerity of that first story really, I thought, lifted the humour and the hokiness of the storytelling that could have been. And this film definitely is still in that category of genuinely having a heart to it and genuinely having sincerity in wanting to explore someone's emotional arc, and also wanting to do the science fiction. And the humour is probably better in this one. You know, this expands the supporting characters, and because of the relationship between your main cast members, you do get a better sense of humour to it. And so there is that. But I do still think the original is better. But to its credit, this sequel does do its best. I think Christopher Landon really has struck upon a style that I would love to see continued, and I am very aware that he recently released the Vince Vaughn Freaky Friday / another slasher film crossover, you know, part slasher, part Freaky Friday film that I'm really quite interested in seeing. And I think now that he's really got his feet under the table of this subgenre, I'm looking forward to seeing that at some point. Both Happy Death Day films, I think, are great. As I say, they really balance the comedy, the horror, and the heart. I will say there is one film that I think did all of that slightly better, which was Final Girls, which was a 2015 film that very much did that same metatextual analysis of the horror slasher genre with a certain sincerity inside of it, and I do think that film got overlooked, but I do think that deserves a re-examination, especially for people who did love the Happy Death Day films. As I say, the first sequel in any film I will always be a little bit hostile towards. This one definitely met and went above my expectations, and I will say that the third in a trilogy does often do it for me. The third one is often the one that will really bring me back. So here's to Happy Death Day to us, hopefully coming sometime in the future. So, thanks again for joining me. I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.